Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the Get French Football News Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening is Rich Allen. 4 games left, 4 more weekends for someone to either raise their game or save themselves. But with the 5th game, penultimately, who took the one small step this way, well, the right way this week, and who made one giant leap the wrong way. All that and more after the latest headlines. Nantes and Rennes got things started with a furious Breton derby at the Stade de la Beaujoire on Friday, which ended 1-1. Adrien Thomasson put the hosts ahead, only for top scorer Emiliano Sala to see red just after the break, with Nicolas Palois putting through his own net to ensure a share of the spoils. Later that evening, Lyon continued their recent vein of strong form with a 5-2 win against Dijon. Naim Sliti's double for the host was cancelled out by 5 different scorers for Ligue, including an own goal from Rongier, who saw captain Nabil Fekir at least start for the first time since February. On Saturday, Marseille continued their pursuit of a Champions League football as well by beating Lille 5-1, condemning the visitors to another defeat, with the club not having won since late January. In the multiplex, Toulouse pulled off a huge 2-0 victory over Angers to make the little gap to those below them in the relegation scrap. To create at least a little gap between those and the relegation places, as Amiens are now just a point away from guaranteed safety as they beat Strasbourg 3-1. Metz couldn't quite build on their win last weekend, only just a point against Caen with a fantastic equaliser by the away side, while Guingamp pulled off the upset of the weekend as they hammered 10-man Monaco in a 3-1 win. That's seen them, the Monégasque, slip their lead to second to just 1 point, with Lyon and Marseille breathing down their necks. On Sunday, Nice strengthened their chances of European football next season with a 1-0 win over rivals Montpellier. Saint-Etienne came from behind as a Robert Beric double sank 2-1, and the Paris Saint-Germain, current champions at least, have eked out a 1-0 win over Bordeaux thanks to a strike from Giovanni Lo Celso. And that's all for now. But for all the latest in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this week with a bit of surprising news that there's now a renewed battle for that second place spot in Ligue 1, and the one that absolutely guarantees Champions League football, because Monaco slipped up at the weekend with both Lyon and Marseille gaining victories, Lyon having their 6th in a row. But we'll focus on the current second place side at the moment, at least first, Rich, and that's Monaco, who had a bit of a testing result the weekend before, obviously with the 7-1 defeat to Paris Saint-Germain, but at the same time going to Guingamp, which isn't always easy, but at the same time they beat Guingamp themselves 6-0 earlier this season. This kind of came out of nowhere, especially with Guingamp looking like their season's pretty much over. It doesn't look like they'll have quite enough momentum to maybe get a Europa League spot with all those other sides chasing 5th. But this is a real blow for a Monégasque side that before that Paris Saint-Germain game hadn't lost in 13 Ligue 1 games.
Yeah, I mean, they're having a wobble at probably the most disastrous time that they could possibly have feared for. They were rocked by that 7-1 defeat to PSG, and nobody expected that, no matter how well PSG played. But in their previous games, they were hardly putting in stellar performances. They got a narrow win over Nantes, narrow win over Lille, drew away at Rennes. It's not the Monaco that we've known sort of the last 18 months. It's a real blip at the wrong time. So after that 7-1 defeat, it was really important that they came out and put in a strong performance against Guingamp, just to show that this wasn't a ship that was on the verge of sinking. And sadly, they didn't. They were down to 10 men pretty early on. Jemison sent off around the 20-minute mark, resulting in the Guingamp taking the lead with a Jimmy Briand penalty. And they never seemed to recover from that. To give Guingamp their credit, they played excellently. We know, as cliched as it is, how difficult it is to play against 10 men, let alone a Monaco side, which by and large are a relatively well organised unit. But Guingamp really came out to play. I think it's been a real joy to see Clement Grenier back playing. Etienne Didot scored an absolute wonder goal. I would heartily recommend checking that out. Catching a corner from Grenier on the volley and hammering it home, spectacular goal. But yeah, it's a worry for Monaco now because they had second place pretty much sewn up. They've now gone on this little run of iffy form, which has now started to convert into iffy form and losing games. The game coming up at the weekend is on paper it would have been an easy game at the start of the season at home to Amiens, but Amiens look like they've secured their Ligue 1 status. They're a really organised team. They're very well organised at the back. They're going to cause Monaco problems. They like to counter. A win at the weekend now doesn't feel quite so certain. So it's a worry for Jardim and his side. I think there's a couple of players in that team who've got one eye now on, okay, well, let's reap the benefits of playing well for a season or 2 seasons. And, we've got the transfer window coming up. And I think there are 1 or 2 players who have got their eye on the exit door too soon. I don't mind them perhaps for looking for a move away, but you've got to make sure you're concentrating on the task in hand. They're not, and I fear it's going to cost them second place.
Yeah, and there's a few things really omitting from the last couple of games. Obviously, the one of the big things as well is losing that comfortable lead it felt like they had in second place, but with the result against Paris Saint-Germain especially, and then obviously another defeat to gang up, although obviously not as heavily, it's sort of they had a giant lead goal scoring wise as well, but the 7 goals they conceded last weekend is evaporated. That allowed Lyon to really have a +4 goal difference on them as well. So if they end up level on points, that puts Lyon right into the driving seat of placing in second, and with both teams also right next to them, with none of them really having a tough schedule. They do have difficult games in terms of teams they have to play, in terms of where they're still situated in the league. Next weekend, a lot of them face teams that are pretty much safe, but Lyon have Troyes, Monaco have Caen the weekend after. Marseille have Nice, who are still facing European football. You look to the weekend after that, and Monaco have Saint-Etienne, who are in terrific form. Lyon have Strasbourg, who are fighting for their lives still as well. Monaco have to face Troyes themselves. They might already be down, but at the same time, they might need a win to make sure that they're in the relegation playoff, maybe at least. So that's the thing they're facing now, is that a couple of weeks ago when we met, we felt like Monaco were comfortably in second when Lyon and Marseille had to sort of face each other and knock one or the other out. Really, that's not really come to force. And in the last couple of weeks defensively, and that's really what I want to highlight, it's been dreadful. That last weekend, I think we all sort of mentioned that without Kamil Glik, they looked a much worse side with him out of the team, with Raji deputising in the middle. He's not as good of a player as he once was. He's more of a functional player, but at the same time, the weekend when Glik does come back in, and I thought they were okay until Jemison had his moment where he handballs on the line, where he maybe really doesn't really need to, but at the same time, they don't have a replacement. They think about bringing Raji on, that they decide against it in the end. There's nothing really solid wise that they can do, and I think this is something that I want to focus on the Brazilian as well. That we mentioned last season, that we worried that Jemison might be the weak link, and he proved next to Kamil Glik that he was good enough for this level, but this at sort of even a Champions League level. But it feels like he's regressed a little bit this season. I think he feels like he's done as much developing as he needs to. He's a little bit more rash. He's not positionally as aware as he has. Glik hasn't been able to wrangle him in as much as he has been in the previous seasons. And I agree with you, Rich. It feels like some of them are playing in second gear at the moment. And I don't know, even the team that Jardim ended up putting out. I mean, he yanked Yuri Tielemans off after 36 minutes for Kevin and Duram, and he didn't really do much. They started Diakabe. Again, he was pulled for Musa Silla. That didn't really kind of make any sort of kind of impact in the game. It just feels like they're sort of cantering to the line. And like you say, a lot of them are looking at the exit door. You think of Fabinho, he's probably going to Paris Saint-Germain, in all honesty, if not another big European club. Thomas Lemar, again, a player we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, hasn't really hit the ground running this season when we expected a lot more big things from him. He will still probably get his move. And obviously the other blow that they had before the start of the game of Radamel Falcao being out with already Jovetic and Keita Balde on the sidelines, they didn't really have a recognised striker as well, which certainly didn't do them any favours at the same time. But against a team like Guingamp, who have been in good form and are a dangerous side, when you look at the likes of Briand and Dido had that wonderful goal, didn't he? And Marcus Thuram had a really good game as well. They even had Clement Grenier back in form as well. Ludovic Blas had that great chance where he hit it straight at Seydou, which could have made it 4, really. And they were in complete control. I mean, Monaco's goal was completely against the run of play. It was their only shot on target. But it took 63 minutes to get even close to that. So it showed you how good Guingamp was. It wasn't just a flash in the pan. It wasn't just a real off day for Monaco. It was a real strong day for Guingamp. But it does alert the worries to you, Rich, and I wanted to think about looking towards next season, really, for them, that they are going to lose some of these big players. There's no doubt about it, and recycling is what Monaco do. But if they lose those players, if they also possibly maybe even lose Jardim as well, it's not going to be as an easy fix as it was, say, a couple of seasons ago, where maybe they had a couple of players ready. It looks like a lot of these other players that they've tested out this season, other than maybe the strides you've seen in someone like Ronnie Lopez, it doesn't look like half of this team is ready.
No, it doesn't. There's definitely going to have to be some positive movement in the transfer market, because, as you say, they're going to see an outgoing of a number of senior players. I think for this season, this summer, they're going to have to look at the defence. They do have some, exciting players, I think, to come back from their loan spells. I'm thinking now might be the time that Paul Nardi finally gets his chance. He'll come back from the sister club in Bruges, as will Jordi Gaspar, the fullback. You've got Ike Benassa, who at times has looked really good for Caen. So he's going to be coming back into the midfield. Suoliho Mate, I think, again, has looked at times really strong on his loan spell with Bordeaux. And then there's Irving Cardona, who at one point we were touting, as silly as this sounds, is he the next one, the next exciting young striker to come through the Monaco system after Mbappe? Well, it's not quite been that way, but he's still certainly a talent. So there's a lot of players to come back from loan spells. Yes, they're going to see departures, but whoever is in charge, and I mean, we'll probably come on to one of the reasons why I don't think Jardim might be there come the start of next season. It's the defence he's going to have to look at. I think the injury that Djibril Sidibe has picked up, which may or may not cost him his World Cup spot, may be enough to keep him at the club for another season. Whether you count that as a blessing or not, I don't know. But they're going to need to strengthen that defence. They're going to have to make their mind up on what's going to happen with Almami Touré, because last season we saw what a talent he was when he was deputising for Sidibe, when either Sidibe was injured or was used on the left. But I don't feel he's not had the opportunity to progress. So when he does play, he looks, he doesn't look in form. He looks a bit patchy, but we know he's a good player. So they're going to have to make their mind up what's going to happen with him. It's going to be a very, very interesting summer. There's a lot of very young, exciting players in that Monaco team. You think they've got Jordi Mbula, such an exciting talent when he was at Barcelona's youth system. He's obviously been utilised more in their reserve team, so he's got to come through. They've got Pietro Pellegrini, who they signed in the summer. He's got to come through. There's other players. There's other sort of fringe players who we know are really good players. I'm looking at people like Bushilia. We know what a good player he is. He had a really nasty injury that kept him out for such a long time. He's at the point now where he wants to play or go. And I think he'll be one that will be perhaps just waiting to see what happens with Lemar. I think when or if Lemar goes in the summer, I think Boshilia is a player that can certainly be brought into that first team. There were spells a couple of seasons ago where he came in and looked excellent and arguably looked better than Lamar at times. So there's certainly some excitement there, but there's a lot of work I think that Monaco need to do, whether that's with Jardim or with a new coach. There's certainly big areas in that squad, and it is the defence primarily that really need to be looked at and really need to be addressed.
Yeah, I think you make some great points there, Rich. That it's strange that we've not seen a little bit more of someone like Mbula, but especially Boshilia, because he was silently important in that the title-winning campaign. He had some brilliant cameos, especially after Champions League games where they needed to give someone a rest, like Lemar or occasionally Bernardo Silva, and he deputised really well in that sort of 4-4-2 formation. But I don't think he's quite got things right yet this season, Jardim, and I also fear that for his sake, thinking of his own career, that does he risk trying to do another experimental rebuilding season? Because if it goes incredibly well, say if he doesn't get a move and it goes, say Monaco finish second again and they have a okay Champions League campaign with recruitment going better again, then it only increases his stock. But if, like it might be heading, where you look at some of these players might not quite be the quality that we've seen in the past, or they might not be, at least in their case, developing a little bit slower, which is absolutely fair enough. You can know young players always grow at different rates, but having that team that maybe finishes fourth, maybe third even, it doesn't quite give the glamour that he might have had in that all the sort of that Ligue 1 success a couple of years ago. The Champions League success is a year longer. It doesn't feel as fresh in the memory. Then it may be starting to slip if he's actually going to get one of those top European jobs, which he should really be in the frame for. But go ahead.
Well, I was going to say we've talked about Monaco and this sort of cyclical nature of their projects, in so much as it's focus on having a couple of good steady years, one excellent season, and one season where they really go for it and then rebuild. I feel like, once it seems like Fabinho and Lamar will go in the summer, it feels as though there's a bit of a feel of an end of an era about that particular cycle. If those two go, they'll have lost those two. They'd have lost Mendy the previous summer, Bakayoko the previous summer. They'd have lost Germain. They'd have lost Bernardo Silva. That's 6 or 7 world-class players really that have gone out the door, and you just obviously Mbappe. I've silly me forgot Mbappe, but you just feel that with Fabinho, yes, okay, there's 1 or 2 players that have still been, Subasic and Falcao and Moutinho will be there, but you just feel that it's come to the end of that particular era, that particular cycle. So it really is, I think, a case of if Jardim is going to go, it's this summer or at the end of the next cycle. Now, the next cycle could be another 4 years away. Does Jardim want to be hanging around for that? Because Monaco won't want to be losing him in the middle of a cycle. If he's there for the duration of that period, because it's his players he'll be bringing in, his eye that will be cast on these young players brought in to eventually get to that 4th year where they hit the really do push PSG. They're not going to be wanting to disrupt things at coach level. So I feel that for Monaco's sake, almost, but certainly for Jardim's sake, if he's going to go, this is the summer to go, unless he is going to be hanging around to oversee this next cycle of whatever happens with Monaco. So I personally think this could be the summer that he goes. I think he's thoroughly enjoyed himself at Monaco. But yeah, I fear for Monaco, because they do then need to make sure they get their recruitment right for the new coach. But yeah, Jardim, I think, could be on his way as well, I think, along with a couple of other players.
Yeah, it certainly feels like that. But credit to Gang Up for an excellent result as well. They had an awful March, really, didn't they? They lost 3 games, all the games they played in that month, but have bounced back with 3 wins and a draw this month, and none bigger than that when they got the weekend players getting fit. They look like the side that Kumbuare has built over the last couple of seasons, really. They're entertaining, attacking, have a solid base as well, both in midfield and defence. They look really strong. They were dangerous. players maybe are starting to grow into their roles a little bit more. I'm thinking like Ludovic Blas, who's is still a very young player, and obviously Grenier coming off injuries that he's had, and Jimmy Briand being really sort of the glue that holds them all together as their captain as well. That it's a terrific result for them, and they could still bother that second place because they have got Marseille coming up in a couple of weeks' time as well. So they might be able to repay the favour, at least for Monaco, after beating them. But on to the two sides below Monaco at the moment, really, and they're both only a point off. And we'll start with Lyon, who got another fantastic result of the weekend, because it's not easy to go away to Dijon this season. It hasn't been for anyone in the league, really. They're one of the best home teams in Ligue 1, but a 5-2 victory gives them their 5th win in a row. It's been a terrific run for them after we really ruled them out a couple of months ago. Again, it feels like the nature of Ligue 1 this season that we seem to write off a team from a certain thing, and they go ahead and prove us wrong again and again and again. But a player that's done that in the last couple of weeks as well for Lyon, Richard, is Memphis Depay. He scored 6 goals now in his last 5 games. He's played a real integral part of what has been a real bounce back for the team, especially with Nabil Fekir out, and getting him back at the weekend starting was a big boon as well for themselves. And they're maybe just coming into form just at the right time, without European football like Marseille have had, without the pressure of feeling like they need to get that second like Monaco does. It maybe Lyon have all of a sudden, out of nowhere, got a real chance at it.
I think so. I think if I was putting money on who finishes second, I probably would put money on Lyon. I think they are playing, and I include PSG in this, I think they're playing the best football in the league at the moment. You look at that, really what could have been a season-breaking, season-ruining defeat at home to CSK Moscow in the Europa League, going down 3-2 at home. That could have been it. That could have been season over. They had 4th wrapped up. Didn't really feel like that any teams below them were going to catch up, but you just felt that they would have just thrown in the towel then and just accepted 4th. But they haven't. They bounced back from that. They scored 3 away they won all their games since. They scored 3 away at Marseille. They've then not conceded in 3 consecutive games, including 5-0 away at Metz, 3-0 at home to Amiens, and then put another 5 then past Dijon at the weekend. They're just playing some really exciting football. And I have to give... I'll come on to Depay because he is playing brilliantly, but you have to give credit to Genesio. I think he's perhaps implemented it a little too late, but he's recognised that there needs to be an alternative plan for how Lyon play their games, how they line up to begin with, and he's moved to a 4-4-2 and a sort of diamond formation, and it's working. It's working, and they're playing really, really well. They've moved away from their sort of 4-3-3, which I think was just proving too predictable. And I think teams were just finding it too easy to defend against that and then hit Lyon on the counter. I mean, the defeat at home to Rennes was the prime example of that a few months ago. But they haven't. Genesio has seen that now. As I say, I think he's done it a little too late, but credit to him. He's changed that formation. They're playing this 4-4-2, and it's potentially rescued their season, because I do believe, although they have probably of the 3 teams the hardest run in. They play 2 teams right near the bottom. One could be potentially relegated by the time they play them, but they got Nantes at home and finish with Nice at home. They're tricky games, and both those teams could still be, when the time of playing, could still be in contention for that Europa League spot. So they're not easy games, but I just can't see Lyon dropping points. They're playing really, really good football. And Depay, I mean, something's happened now. The cynic in me thinks, is he playing because he thinks, if I play well now, I could get a summer move? Is he playing well because he thinks, I need to prove some doubters wrong? Or has he finally just found a setup that works for him? I hope and pray that it's the latter, because he's shown some real maturity. He's shown that he can play as part of a team. I think selfishness has been a bit of a downfall of his. But he's playing as part of a team. He's got a good partnership going with Bertrand Traoré. He's looked like he does want to play with Mariano Diaz when Diaz has come on. So they've got him almost back to his best, it seems. They've now got Fekir back from injury. And there's just a lot of good feeling, I think, with Lyon. There's a lot of positivity within the camp. And it does feel that you look at the 3 teams in contention for second place. At the minute, it feels like it's basically Memphis and Fekir Yeah, Memphis is the form player. Fekir's just returned from injury. You've got Marseille. Payet is the form player. Thauvin just come back from a little bit of a knock. And then it's Monaco, where you think, well, apart from Ronnie Lopez, there's no real standout player at the minute. So I just think with the form that Lyon are now going into their final 4 games, they are the team. They are the team that has second place, I think, within the grasp, because I can't see them dropping points. I can see Monaco dropping points. And as soon as Monaco, drop even 1 point, that lets Lyon in. The goal difference. This run of form with all these goals going in is proving, it's not just showing how well they're playing, but it could prove to be incredibly crucial come the end of this. It's only 4 goals in it. It could prove a real difference maker come the end of the season. So I'm really impressed with the way that Lyon are playing, really impressed with the attitude and performances that Memphis is putting in. And you've got to give credit to Genesio.
And then you add in the fact that Nabil Fekir is back fit and even scoring at the weekend as well. Now he's starting games as well, which is a real plus to get right near the end of the season. What a boost to have your captain and the player of the first half of the season in Ligue in Fekir joining the ranks as well. And just as the forwards finally feel like they're not being as selfish as they have been seemingly all season. Everyone wants to score goals, but they also have to understand that sometimes laying them on is just as important, really. And it finally feels like, especially in this game where there was a lot of that interplay and the fresh movement and the bits that we saw very much at the start of the season, it worked so much better. They looked so much more comfortable with it, and getting everyone on the score sheet as well. Obviously, Diaz didn't, and it was an own goal that capitalised the five goals. But Cornet and Traore were also on the score sheet. Fantastic news for them as they start to move forward, and they've been in sensational form. And like you say, Rich, it's difficult not to back them if the momentum continues, especially because. Go ahead.
I was going to say one other factor that we continue, I think, to underestimate is they've got a settled 11 now, pretty much. It feels like, apart from perhaps Bertrand Traore and Mariano Diaz just swapping in and out, it feels as though that there is a settled 11 that Genesio has landed on. He knows who his preferred, not necessarily, I don't think his best, but he knows what his preferred back four is. He's got that midfield diamond now working well with our Toussaint and Ndombele playing behind the returning Fekir, and then he's got Memphis plus another up front. And I think just having that settled 11, which I think has cost Marseille a little bit with all the injuries that they've had and tinkers that they've had to do here, right? And with the starting 11, same with Monaco. I think, as we saw with Monaco last season and how consistent their 11 was, the fact that Lyon now, for a few games running, have been able to play a pretty consistent 11, bar one or two little changes, is another factor I think that gives them the edge.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I was just going to mention that it feels like they maybe have, like you say, the edge because of not having the games in Europe. Because the team that's also in great form is Marseille, who had a great result at the weekend, 5-1 win against, yes, a struggling Lille side, but you can only beat the teams that are in front of you, especially after they were sort of had a little bit of a stutter, didn't they? Sort of the end of March, we thought that result against Lyon might just push them away with them in third and pulling Lyon back into it, especially again than the draw against Montpellier did. They had to obviously come from behind twice against Troyes to win, but this was a much better performance, much more in the ilk of that sort of RB Leipzig result that got them into the semi-finals of the Europa League that will obviously continue on Thursday, and they look forward to that, a massive chance for them to possibly get into a European final, which would be just as big. But at the same time, much like Lyon, they finally have players turning up. I don't put it as insultingly as that, but you look at the likes of Dimitri Payet at the weekend. He put in a nice solid performance. Kostas Mitroglou got a double and is scoring more goals recently now. I think he's got 4 in his last 4 as well, which was something they were really missing at the start of the season. We constantly mentioned that they didn't really have a goal scorer or something like that, and they had to rely so much on Florian Thauvin. But finally, all the players are starting to step up to the mark, and pretty much just at the exact time they would need them to, Rich, when they've got battling on two fronts, the potential at a trophy, a potential at Champions League football qualifying through the league. They've got an excellent chance at that, and having two players like Mitroglou and Payet with great experience as well at those kind of levels, it's a real plus for them, isn't it?
It absolutely is. I don't want to sound like a broken record. It has been a season, I think, where PSG have won very ugly on a number of occasions. I don't think it was the case at the weekend. I think they were aided by a Lille side who I think probably had written this game off and were probably going to be putting all their efforts into the coming weekend's fixture, which is absolutely massive. But Marseille still put in the performance. And as you say, we've now, I think, over the last, 6 weeks, bordering 2 months, we've started to see, I think, on a more regular basis, the Dimitri Payet that we know, the Dimitri Payet that was here before he moved to West Ham, the Dimitri Payet that was, the putting in the performances he did in his first season with West Ham, and the Dimitri Payet that Marseille have really missed through the majority of this season. I won't go into the reasons why I think he's suddenly playing well, but the main thing for Marseille is he is playing well. And he's not the anonymous figure he has been for a significant number of matches this season. He's playing well. He's influential. Some of the passing that he's putting in is great. He's getting on the score sheet. It's the Payet that we know that he can play at. It's the level he can play at. We know that. So it's incredibly important that they found the recipe to get that from him. As you say, Mitroglou is now scoring. They seem to have worked the recipe out for how to get him scoring. And again, I think it's been quite canny managing from Rudy Garcia, I think, because Germain was his preferred striker for the last few weeks, I think, probably months, but was really struggling to find the net. Mitroglou then in the last few weeks was starting to be introduced off the bench and would come on and would prove to be a really good impact sub. But he resisted, I think, the urges to put him straight back into the start 11. He kept him as that impact sub. And you started to find that gradually he'd come on, impact, goal, come on, impact, goal. And all of a sudden that builds up your confidence. And you're then starting to be eager to play. You want to prove, I can do this. I can do this from the start. Lo and behold, he's introduced from the start and he gets on the score sheet and he gets a double. And, he's starting to look like the player that we feared we probably would never see in Ligue, considering how poor he was when he first joined Marseille. And then they've got Thauvin. So Thauvin has not as recently as Fekir, but has returned from a few weeks out with an injury. He's back. He's found his feet almost instantly, scoring. He got a double at the weekend. So it's all good for Marseille. They've got they had that excellent Europa League win over RB Leipzig. They've got the semi-final then at home this weekend. It's going to be a sellout at the Velodrome. It could have been a sellout about 3 or 4, maybe even 5 or 6 times with the number of people that applied for tickets. But it's going to be a great atmosphere. That's the key, I think, for Marseille. They've got that support now on their side. For too many seasons now, that Marseille crowd has been so quick to turn on that team. And in turn, that's not going to help the players. If you've got players who are struggling to perform, having 30, 40, 50, 60,000 people on your back for 85 minutes of a game is not going to be getting the best out of you. They haven't. They're now getting, they're getting full crowds. They're getting a brilliant atmosphere at the Velodrome. And, lo and behold, the performances now reflect that. So I think there's a danger, I think, that they could, and I would argue it's the right thing to do, is focus on, well, they've now got to the semi-finals. They've on paper got the easier of the semi-finals that they could have wished for. Why not go all in? Go all in for Europa League success, because get past Red Bull Salzburg, which is very plausible. You've then got a one-off game against Arsenal or Atletico. That's a doable win. It's a game that they could easily win. So I think they should be going all in on that. They have a relatively easy run in. I think at home to Nice is probably as difficult as it gets in their final 4 games. But I think, my message, I think, to Marseille would be, go for this Europa League glory. Think of what it can be, especially with the final being at Lyon. Think of the bragging rights that they would have. Think of what it would do to that team. Gives them Champions League football next season, guaranteed. And all of a sudden, they can attract in that higher quality of play. All of a sudden they are a Europa League winner. They're Champions League on a plate next season. Top 4 finish at least in Ligue. All of a sudden, this Champions project, as we like to jest about, but all of a sudden, that can really start to gain some traction. So I think it's potentially the start of some really exciting times for Marseille. But I think it's so crucial. I think that they really go for this Europa League success.
Yeah, because you don't remember the teams that finish second. You remember the teams that win trophies. I'm sure players will be very much looking to get a medal on their mantelpiece rather than a congratulations for turning up kind of trophy for managing to get Champions League football. But regardless of if they do finish in the Champions League places or if they do win the Europa League, Champions League football will be a massive boost for this club. I mean, we keep forgetting that the Champions project, they obviously spent quite a bit of money bringing a lot of these players in, like Payet. I know that they didn't spend extraordinary amounts, but the attraction of the club, the best supported club in France, a magnificent stadium in a great city, a great history of that club as well as a European juggernaut, really, in times during the 80s times as well. But that's a fantastic club built on the right sort of foundations with a little bit of money backing, with Champions League football guaranteed for group stages as well. If they can get that, what a massive boost that would be. What players they could possibly attract. And from there, I know I don't want to get Marseille fans too excited. They may be able to start to think about maybe if they can buy some of the players, maybe if they can have some of the infrastructure, attract the right kind of players to their club, having the right manager at the helm as well. Maybe they can do something in Europe. Maybe they can maybe even push Paris Saint-Germain should they have another off season or something like that, or at least have a better seat at the table in French football. At the moment we sort of have a big disparity between Paris Saint-Germain and the rest of them, but maybe this sort of second tier teams of Monaco, Marseille, Lyon can use this season and possible Champions League football attractions and money to build some foundation for the next couple of seasons. But
so just for that, Ligue needs a strong Marseille team. It really does. And as you say, that what can be offered with Marseille as almost a complete counter to what can be offered further north in the capital. To really reignite the basis of what that rivalry was all about, was the sort of slightly upmarket, upper classes of PSG against the sort of hardworking, working class. There's a lot of sort of an immigrant support for that, for Marseille, and that's what the romanticism of what Marseille were all about. You look at that Marseille team of the late 80s, early 90s. That's what they should be selling to these players, and combine that then with in theory a Europa League success with Champions League football. It becomes a really compelling offer for any player that wants to look at going somewhere, and you try and find me a player that wouldn't want to play in the atmosphere we saw in the Velodrome in that RB Leipzig game. I don't think you'll have seen a better atmosphere than that game. That was a proper cauldron. And I think if Marseille can keep that going, Ligue needs Marseille to be strong. It really does. And the foundations are now there. They now need to make sure that everybody is buying in and they have the right people selling the right image of the club. Because sell that right, and yeah, you could be bringing in some really world-class players that really could transform Marseille's fortunes for the better.
Which would be great for, like you say, not just the club, but for Ligue as a whole as well. But on to matters at the bottom of the table, because they keep, week in, week out, really getting more and more interesting. And the real seismic movement, you might say, this weekend was Toulouse's victory, 2-0 win over Angers. And it also means that obviously they also play their rescheduled game tomorrow as well against Caen, which was called off back about a week, just over a week ago, for the rain down there in Caen. It's a massive opportunity now for them, Rich, to separate themselves between those and the bottom three, really, because now there's a 4-point gap opened up, a game in hand, an excellent chance for them to be on 36 points. And at this stage of the season, really, with the games left for the teams below them, with the confidence level a lot of them are showing, that kind of gap to 36 points, even to 34. So say to lose, even just only get a point against Caen, it's starting to feel like that 5-point gap seems like a chasm rather than a little hill for these teams now to go over. Because you look at Troyes, but recent weeks they've gone ahead twice in big games against Marseille and Saint-Etienne, but ended up losing. Lille have had some heavy defeats, really. Metz, unfortunate the weekend, got a great goal from Cole for them to nick a point, but it's starting to feel maybe that with that Toulouse result, that those three are fighting for who can get a relegation playoff and try their luck there.
Yeah, there was a sort of feel of penultimate nail in the coffin, shall we say, about that Toulouse win. I mean, it was huge for them. They'd gone probably a couple of months without a win. So it was really, really important that they won that game. It now means that they can go into that Caen game thinking, you know what, if if Caen and Toulouse think carefully, they could play out a draw and they both probably would guarantee their survival. But it just allows Toulouse to think, well, actually, you know what, we don't have to necessarily go into this game thinking absolutely, it's do or die in terms of taking 3 points. I think a point probably would be enough, because I mean, I could make an argument that I think a 4-point gap is big enough at this moment in time. I think Troyes have a particularly nasty run in. Lille or Metz, one of those teams are going to be losing points at the weekend. If not, both will be dropping points. So I think it was an absolutely massive win for Toulouse. I think it would have been very easy, considering how poorly I think they've played, because I do think they've played really poorly. It would have been, I think, very easy with an Angers side who, at that point in time, weren't 100% sure of their own survival. I think they've got enough now, but weren't. I don't feel that they were 100%. And obviously, they didn't pick up any points. So I just feel that with no other teams really picking up except for Toulouse, I think it would have been easy, I think, for Toulouse to have rolled over again. But they didn't. They came out strong. They put in a solid performance. I think Angers put up too much of a fight. But it was a really, really big 3 points. It's been a very difficult season. What's felt like, again, for Toulouse, you just feel that, again, they're another team that there's one or two that are sort of down that bottom end of the table. You just feel that it's not going to take a lot for things to change at Toulouse to all of a sudden mean that they are looking like Montpellier. They are battling for sort of that lower end of the top half of the table. I don't think it would take a great deal of change there, because there are some really good players there. I think what the problem is for Toulouse now is they've had too many seasons fighting relegation, that those top players, and I'm looking at the likes of Issa Diop, I'm looking at the likes of Alban Lafont, there's one or two other really talented young players. I think this is probably the season where they will go. And that then is the problem for Toulouse, because it's not the most attractive club to bring in quality players. They've got a pretty good youth system. They have brought through a lot of good young players, but I think they've done enough this season to survive. I think the fear comes, next season, if or when they lose some of those key players. I mean, how many points Lafont and Diop alone have probably saved Toulouse this season? I dread to think, because it's probably a ridiculous amount. But I fear that those sort of few and far between real talented players that Toulouse have will look to move on in the summer. Then next season, I fear that they can't keep avoiding the drop. At some point, unless there's drastic change, at some point they're gonna succumb to it. And I just fear that if things happen as I predict that they're going to happen this summer, that next season is the season that'll happen.
Yeah, and this is the difficulty for teams in and around there is how do you replace such big players like Lafont and Diop if they do go? Yes, you get the money in, but do you buy an entire squad with that kind of cash? Do you spend it on 2 or 3 players that will be really big risks for clubs without that kind of financial backing to reinvest it elsewhere if they don't work out, which would definitely sink you? It's a strange balancing act that these kind of teams have to try and meld between, because like you say, they have a lot of areas they still need to fix, even if they were to stay, really. And if they are to stay at the same time, they haven't got the funds really to replenish them into the squad to improve them. Really, they're going to have to do some really canny movements. Really, much like a Montpellier, as you pointed out.
Montpellier and Guingamp are the models to be following for teams like Toulouse. I think Toulouse can ultimately probably aim a bit higher. I think what they have to offer there. I think they do have a really strong youth system there. They have through their ranks. In recent times, they helped Gignac on his way to Marseille. They've had talented players. They produce talented players, but they just need 1 or 2 things to change. Unfortunately, they're quite key things, but just 1 or 2 things to change. And that count, because it wasn't that long ago that Toulouse really were challenging for, a sort of 6th or 7th finish. So there's no reason why that can't happen again. But there's going to have to be a couple of really important changes that go on at that club, and I just feel that I feel they're not going to happen.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? You can follow those models, but it's at the same time implementing it correctly, because we always have to remember that, especially a team like Toulouse, it is a rugby town, and that does, in a way, although the talent they bring in and bits like that, it does hold them back financially, because they don't get the gates that they would usually do unless a Monaco or a Paris Saint-Germain or a Marseille are in town, and that's where they, at the end, that will maybe possibly hold them back from trying to get that voice for support, getting that extra little bit of cash and spending it wisely. But at the same time, they do look like, if they do get a result in midweek, that they'll pretty much be safe, really, especially with a win. It feels like Caen maybe a little bit too far away. It's maybe only Strasbourg, if crazy things happened at the bottom, might be pulled into it. But looking at the 3 sides that are in that relegation fight, all fighting for that 3rd spot so they get into a playoff, really, and there's a enormous game this week coming up, really, Rich, and that's between Lille and Metz. I mean, Lille are in absolutely dire straits at the moment. I mentioned on the intro that they've not won since that winning at Strasbourg back in on the 28th of January, and since then it's been defeat after defeat. There's a couple of draws in there, but nothing really to really rouse them out of their slumber. And at the same time, Metz know that game is absolutely do or die for them now. They got that draw at the weekend, which did help. It would have been great for them to get a win, because they would have only been a point behind Lille instead, which made this game absolutely massive, but not the be-all or end-all, at least for Metz, given the results that had gone their way. But now it does feel like it's do or die. And with that kind of pressure, with Lille still having, obviously, the suspension of their stadium and bits like that, they're still struggling for form. They've been okay in some games. They've not really didn't really put too much of a fight at the weekend. But there's also reports with their players going for nights out before games and not listening to instructions, etc., etc. It's a worrying time for them, especially when they're playing a team that could leap from them, and really, if all the results go their way, pull Lille into a really troubling situation.
Yeah, you feel as though it's the game that if both teams draw, they're down. If one team wins, the other one's down. It's basically a draw is those matches where a draw is absolutely no good to either of them. It really isn't. There has to be a winner in this game. If either of these teams are to stay up, one of them has to win. So it is a massive game. I think those disciplinary issues at Lille just compound what has been an absolutely... It's almost felt like it's redefined what a disastrous season actually is. From where we started with Lille, with a 3-0 win over Nantes, I think, in the very first game. Bielsa in charge, these exciting young players. And we're now talking about a game that they simply have to win at home to Metz to stand even the faintest of chances of staying up. It's absolutely appalling that it's got to that situation. And the fact then that you've got players, and senior players as well, going out, drinking, basically just it's not the image you need to be giving out. You've got the most important match of the season coming up at the weekend. I get that you've had a tough season. I get that you're going to need some downtime, but you've got to be more. You've got to be a bit more switched on about how you do that and the impression that you give. It was just ridiculous. So it's going to be interesting to see how that affects the team, because it's one of two ways, isn't it? And it's an obvious thing to say, but they either lose, and it's a case of those players have really cost them, and the ill discipline, going out when they shouldn't be going out, it's just compounded the misery further. Or they use that to think, well, actually, you know what, people are now questioning us, questioning our beliefs, questioning our desire to fight for this team, and they go out and they put in the performance of the season and they get the 3 points. Speaking to Jez actually earlier, and he was a Mets fan. He was like, "This is the last thing I wanted to come out before this game, because it's really going to fire up the Lille players, because they're facing now all this criticism." Because I fear it's going to go that way. I mean, Mets are the form team of the two, but I just feel that Lille. I don't think either of these teams are going to survive now, but I just feel that Lille will be able to drag that belief of surviving just that little bit longer. So it's a massive game, but I'm predicting a real narrow Lille win there.
That's the funny thing about this reveal, really, for Lille. It feels like in any other season it would motivate them, but at the same time, there seems to be so many different scenarios that should be encapsulating them and bringing them closer and more together, and it never really has quite clicked this season. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it forces them back into their shell a little bit. Again, we speak about the lack of leadership they've had this season, and it feels like, in fact, that kind of thing, to me, might still affect them to the point where they sort of freeze on the pitch, thinking, why really should we continue to bother if we're just going to get criticism for what many young players would say is maybe just living their lives a little bit. But it's a tough one for them. And thinking of 12 very quickly as well, just to mention that they have a big game as well against Caen, because their last 3 games are Lyon, Montpellier, and Monaco, and that is a treacherous one for them. We've mentioned it a few times already that they have an awful end to the season, and it's a shame that they've maybe not picked up anything against Marseille and Saint-Etienne, when maybe they deserved a little bit of something. But that's a real a gauntlet to go through at the end of the season to try and force yourself to stay up. I fear that all 3 of them have too many difficult games. They're either out of form or just too far away from teams below. It's probably going to be between those 3 and who fights for playing a league side for a 2-game knockout later on back in the back end of May. On to our final topic this weekend, and that's what to do with French football rather than Ligue 1, and that's one of the biggest managers in the history of French football, and that's Arsene Wenger, who has announced his departure from Arsenal back on Friday, that he'll leave the club after 22 years in charge, 3 Premier League titles, 8 FA Cups, more than any other manager in English football. He really revolutionised English football as well. He was terrific in France, obviously, beforehand with Monaco winning the league with them, and brought a couple of their players over to England as well when transformed them. But I just wanted to get your thoughts, Rich, as well on what has been a terrific career, and really also looking ahead, because he's not retiring from this as well. There has been rumours that PSG might get him involved as some kind of president for the club because of his contacts, because of his methodology of football, and maybe implementing finally a Paris Saint-Germain way, so to speak. And there's a couple of clubs across Europe that have been discussing possibilities of that, not just as a potential managerial post. So both his impact as a French manager in English football, but also what could lie ahead for him as well.
You just, I don't think you can really summarise just how big of an impact he really had. I think nowadays a lot of people have just taken that for granted, but I think you rewind the clock back 22 years, back to 1996, and you look at the state of football then, and we were still in the days of the drinking culture in football, the sort of bad boy image of footballers. Managers were sort of these chiseled old, been there, done that kind of coaches who would, think that the best way to get through to a player would be to unload, 40 expletives in a 20-word sentence or something like that. And then Wenger came in with this completely new way of coaching a team, of treating players, of just being a human being, a real human side to a manager and his relationship with his players, and really caring for them, nurturing for them, look after them, sort of guide them in their life, almost away from the pitch just as much as on the pitch. The sort of habits that he introduced, the training methods, the diet, the attitude, it's all that now that exists to this day that we just take for granted. And you just think, well, that's just part and parcel of every coach's mantra on how they'll do things. Well, it started really with Arsene Wenger all those years back in 1996, because at the time he arrived and he was this, to perhaps the slightly more ignorant, media and even some players and coaches, he was just this guy that came over from Japan, and what does he know about football? Well, proved to be that actually he knew an awful lot about football. And I think, it's sad how it's perhaps ended. I think we'd have all asked, even the most diehard of Tottenham fans, perhaps not the most diehard of Tottenham fans, but certainly I think a lot of football fans, not just Arsenal fans, would have wanted to see Wenger go out on a much higher platform than perhaps he is. It's not been a particularly enjoyable 10 years or so. The sort of the latter sort of half of his tenure there, it's not had anywhere near as much success as the first half of it, and it's been slightly sad to see. But sadly he just became the victim of his own success, because over the years more and more coaches adopted how he coached, and players that he coached moved into management, and they took on what they learned from Wenger, and basically they got to the level of him. And as we've then seen with the likes of you've got your Guardiolas, they've got to that level of how Arsene Wenger treats players, and then have just developed it a little bit further. Sadly for Arsene Wenger, just purely I think based on the length of time he's been in the game, he's probably reached as far as he could go with that style with Arsenal, and it now is definitely the right time to have gone. I think perhaps even a couple of years ago he could have gone. But I'm glad he's going. I'm glad we can finally get an end to all this Wenger out nonsense, these pathetic banners and planes and all that nonsense, because this is a man who, without him in the Premiership, half these teams, half these players, half these fans wouldn't have seen the levels of success that we have seen over the last few years, because I don't think any other coach, certainly in the Premier League era, has done as much or anywhere near as much to invoke as much positive change in and around football. And it's the away from football as well. And do check out, I think it's Henry Winter put a thread on Twitter of some various anecdotes about Arsene Wenger away from football, and the charity work he does, and the compassionate human side that he has. And he just genuinely seems like a really nice guy who has really not deserved the level of abuse that he's got over these last few years from, I speak to a lot of genuine Arsenal fans, and they've got some real constructive ways to criticise Wenger, and that's fine. But you don't go out and you're slating him. I don't want to say it, but it's almost Arsenal would be nowhere where they are, nowhere near the level of expectation that fans have now, were it not for Wenger. And I think a few fans of Arsenal perhaps just lost sight of that. So it's going to be really sad to see him go, because we're not going to see, especially in the Premier League, we're not going to see another manager doing anywhere near the level of stint that Wenger has done with Arsenal. We've seen once the announcement came out, just how many players, past, present, pundits, people away from football, just the level of praise for Wenger and what he has done for all walks of life around that club. I genuinely, I think I've said before, I didn't see that with when Ferguson went. I genuinely didn't. I don't feel as though his impact was anywhere near the levels of Wenger's. I get his impact at Manchester United, yes, but you see the struggles that they've had post-Ferguson. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens post-Wenger at Arsenal. But he's a legendary manager. I don't think we're going to see certainly anyone like him for quite some time. I think the only one that can potentially lay claim to being, Arsene Wenger Mark II is perhaps a Guardiola who has had in his early managerial career anyway, a pretty significant impact on the way football is played and training methods and all this, that, and the other. But he's certainly once in a lifetime is Wenger.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like to pick it up from two angles that I always think about when I think about Arsene Wenger. And as a Manchester United fan, you wouldn't be surprised that initially it's a rival. He always had, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, had excellent teams that had vigor, that had style, that had flair, that always created danger, and always had terrific battles with my favorite team and my favorite manager, obviously. But he always brought that excellence to them. They always gave you a good game. They always had a strong mentality, and then the sort of shift as well from Arsene Wenger that a lot of people saw sort of after that Invincible season. He'd sort of, people kind of forget they've achieved perfection in a way, really, and to go from there is difficult. And what he wanted to do was build almost an Arsenal. Again, I don't really like saying the Arsenal way or any team's way, really, but a style of football, a possession-based game. You know, people used to moan that Arsenal tried to walk the ball in, but they wanted to play attractive football, and they did. But the thing I loved about that team, looking from afar, and I say that with quotation marks in the air, given that my allegiances, obviously, but the fact that he wanted to bring young players to the club, young English players as well, especially, that seems to get lost on a few people, that he did try so much to do what we really love about French football, of giving young players a chance, what we love about all football, really, and we don't get it anymore, of giving those players a chance through the academy, buying them from other clubs before a lot of teams already did it, and taking a risk on those players and giving them a chance. And in the end, a lot of them didn't really fully work out, unfortunately, and maybe he can be criticised for not mixing enough experience at the right times, and obviously injuries as well played a factor in that. But I always respected that evolution to try and do something like that. The fact that Arsenal have always kind of been in the black, they've always never looked to go absolutely crazy in the transfer market like we see a lot of other teams, like Manchester United, like the money-rich teams like Manchester City and Chelsea, even to a degree Liverpool at times, and even Tottenham in seasons, although that was obviously supplemented by other means. But he has a great amount of my respect. I think he's been a terrific manager. And like you mentioned, I think everyone will say it is a shame. He probably should have gone last season, really, and realised how sort of toxic not only at the club it had got, but how much of everything seemed to be going against him. Everything seemed to be slowly slipping away from him. He's maybe realised it a season too late, but at the same time, that won't really dim how excellent he was. And very quickly, Rich, looking ahead to the future, I want to mention one of the rumours, really, with it being obviously a Ligue 1 club and a big one at that in Paris Saint-Germain. It's not the managerial role that's possibly being touted, but a potential president's role. If that interests him, would that be a good move for the Parisians?
Bringing him in any form of capacity, I think, would be an excellent move. I think there's been rumours of a sporting director role as well, with Antero not quite perhaps being overly keen on his role at the minute, and the sort of conflict that he's facing with, from above and below. So I think if PSG were being clever about this, they'd be looking at bringing him in a sporting director capacity, bringing in an exciting. I don't think, without someone like Wenger, I don't think a manager or coach like Thomas Tuchel should be going for PSG. I think he would need someone like Wenger who could be that stopgap between him and El Khelaïfi, because I think El Khelaïfi at the minute has got too much power over that team, too much influence over that team. Yes, I get what role he's got, but he needs to realise he's not a football man. He's a businessman, and he's obviously a very successful businessman, but he's not a football man. So I think to bring someone like Wenger in, who obviously lives and breathes football to a ridiculous level, I think can be an excellent stopgap. He gets on well with the Qataris. He's had history with them. And I just think he would work really well with Tuchel. I think Tuchel could learn from him. I think Tuchel will be able to talk to him, will be able to discuss things with him. Tuchel would almost be allowed to be focusing more on the coaching of the team, And I think also the big thing that PSG lack is a respect from players up to management, and having someone like Wenger around the club, that is only going to breed respect. So, if you're PSG, for me, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, it does certainly feel like that, especially if he is possibly open to that. But a credit for him on a terrific decades at Arsenal, really. And like you say, Richard, it's very unlikely that we'll see the likes of him. And in fact, well, mentioned it when Sir Alex left to Manchester United. It's very unlikely in any kind of football, really, that we may see the likes of these kind of great managers staying for great periods of time as well, with elongated amounts of success as well anytime soon. That's all that we have time for this evening. My thanks to Rich and all of you listening at home. We will be back at the same time, same place next week. A bientôt and goodbye.